Hey there, I'm Christian, and this is the breakdown for my audio implementation video. Most of the work is done here in Wwise, and three categories, ambience, environment, and objects, contain 90% of the sounds, and they represent all the objects that you can see in the level. All of these sounds are either playing continuously or they're triggered every X amount of seconds, like this one, which also has an offset randomization, because most of them are not interactable except for this one. Here, in fact, you can interact with the phonograph once you are close enough inside the collision box. And if you press the E button, it pauses the phonograph. And if you press it again, thanks to the flip-flop, it resumes it. And this is the only interactable object that we have in the level, so that the player is actually incentivized to interact with the environment. I created this simple system that I used throughout the whole level, and it basically triggers an action, in this case the door pounds, only if the player is inside the collision box that I set up for a specified amount of time. In this way, the player triggers the events only if he actually progresses through the level. One element worth noticing is the glissando chaos, which is a blend track, and inside there are 3 random containers that play continuously. It is controlled by an RTPC that switches between piano, mezzo forte, and forte. And here is how I set it up in Unreal. So I set up a collision box in the corridor at the end, where I get the actor location, and based on that I map the start of the corridor and the end of the corridor to a range, and based on that range I control the RTPC inside the Wwise. So for the footsteps I use a switch container that includes 4 different materials, and each material contains both the left and the right foot. In Unreal, in the physics sections of the settings, I set up different surface types. Then inside the material settings of each object that the player would walk on, I change the phys material with the corresponding one. So you're able to detect on which material the player is actually walking on. And then here in the animation settings, I took the actor location and I traced the line under the character so it's able to detect the material I'm walking on. And based on the surface type, I change the switch so that it plays the correct container in Wwise. And finally, this is how I manage the breathing system. So basically, I have divided the breath in 4 different intensities. A normal, which is when the character is walking and nothing is happening. Then there is low, medium, and high based on the events happening around the character. Each container is divided in closed mouth and open mouth breath, so that it adds more realism to it. And each container has a different weight, so that the open mouth breath is more likely to happen than the closed mouth one. Every container is set to step mode, so that the sample plays only once. And every breath is composed both of the inhale and the exhale part together. To change the intensity of the breath, I used a switch container, and this is how I set it up. So as you can see, the normal intensity is basically almost only at 0, and then the low one is the most frequent one. And to me this made more sense as it was more realistic. And since the switch happens below the sequence container, which is playing continuously, it ensures that every sample will always finish playing, and then it would change to the current intensity. And this is how I set up the RTPC for the breath intensity. It's on slew rate with a release of 3 units per second. So when the values go from one to another, the transition is smooth and everything feels more realistic. Then I created 4 different breath intensity values, and I associated these values to certain elements of the level, like for example the door pounds, the door slam, and the clock ring, so that the player character reacts to the environment around him the same way you would do in real life.